The Pacific Ocean crashed against the San Diego coastline as Lieutenant Sarah Chun stepped off the military transport bus at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. The salty air filled her lungs as she looked toward the compound that would either forge her into one of America's most elite warriors or break her completely. At 26, Sarah had already proven herself exceptional. A former Division I swimmer at Stanford, she had graduated at the top of her class from the Naval Academy and excelled in every assignment as a surface warfare officer. But none of that mattered now. Standing 5 feet 6 inches tall, with lean muscle built from years of competitive swimming and military training, Sarah carried her sea bag toward the basic underwater demolition/SEAL training compound. Her black hair was pulled back in the regulation bun, and her dark eyes held the steady determination that had carried her through every challenge in her life. She was the first woman to make it this far in the SEAL pipeline, and every person on base knew it. The moment she walked through the gates, conversation stopped. Groups of male candidates looked her way with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. Some whispered among themselves. Others stared openly. Sarah kept her eyes forward and her shoulders straight. She had expected this reaction and prepared herself for it mentally. What she hadn't prepared for was the weight of representing not just herself, but every woman who had ever dreamed of serving at this level. Commander James Mitchell observed Sarah's arrival from his office window on the second floor of the training building. A 20-year veteran of special operations with multiple combat deployments, Mitchell had trained thousands of SEAL candidates. He had seen the strongest men cry, the most confident warriors quit, and the most prepared candidates wash out in the first week. The Navy had made it clear that Sarah would receive no special treatment, and Mitchell intended to hold that line. In his mind, the standards existed for a reason, and lowering them for anyone would dishonor every SEAL who had earned the trident. Captain Rodriguez, the commanding officer of the training facility, joined Mitchell at the window. "There she is," Rodriguez said, watching Sarah navigate through the crowd of male candidates. "The brass is watching this closely. Media is sniffing around too, though we're keeping them at bay for now." Mitchell nodded. "She'll get the same training as everyone else. If she can't hack it, that's on her. If she can, then she earned it like every other SEAL." "The men are going to test her," Rodriguez observed. "Not just the instructors, the other candidates." "That's part of the process," Mitchell replied. "If she can't handle pressure from her classmates, she sure as hell can't handle pressure from enemy forces." Down on the grinder, Sarah found her assigned barracks room. Her roommate situation had been carefully considered by the command structure. Rather than placing her alone or with other women who weren't in the program, they had modified a section of the barracks to give her privacy while still keeping her integrated with her class. It was a compromise that satisfied regulations while acknowledging the unique situation. As Sarah unpacked her gear, she could hear the other candidates talking in the hallway. Most were recent college graduates like herself, though some were older sailors who had worked their way up through the enlisted ranks to earn their chance at SEAL training. The average age was 24, and every one of them had already completed months of preparatory training and screening just to reach this point. Her first real interaction came when she stepped out to use the common area. A tall, broad-shouldered candidate from Texas named Jake Morrison was holding court with several others, discussing their backgrounds and motivations for joining the program. "I'm telling you guys, my grandfather was a Marine in World War II," Jake was saying. "Always regretted he didn't try for the Raiders. Looking forward to training with all of you." Jake shook her hand with a grip that was firmer than necessary. Jake Morrison, Naval Academy, class of 2018. Played football. He held her hand a beat longer than normal, as if testing her reaction. Sarah met his gaze steadily and squeezed back with equal pressure. Stanford, class of 2019. Swimming. 400 individual medley was my specialty. "Swimming's good for this program," Tony interjected diplomatically. "Water confidence is huge." "We'll see," Jake said with a slight smirk. "Pool swimming's a lot different from ocean work with full gear." Sarah smiled pleasantly. "I spent summers surf swimming in Half Moon Bay. Cold water, big waves. Should be fine." The exchange was polite on the surface, but everyone present understood the subtext. Jake was establishing himself as an alpha personality while subtly questioning Sarah's credentials. It was a dance that would be repeated countless times in the coming weeks as the group dynamics formed and reformed under stress. Over the next few days, the candidates went through administrative processing, medical checks, and initial physical assessments. The instructors were professional but demanding, making it clear that the real training would begin soon enough. Sarah noticed that she was often singled out for closer observation during these preliminary activities, not because she was struggling, but because everyone was curious to see how she would perform. The first major test came during the initial physical screening test. The standards were identical for all candidates: a 500-yard swim in 12.5 minutes, at least 50 push-ups in 2 minutes, at least 50 sit-ups in 2 minutes, a minimum of 10 pull-ups with no time limit, and a 1.5-mile run in 10.5 minutes or less. These were just the minimums to avoid immediate dismissal. Sarah completed the swim in 10 minutes and 15 seconds, placing her in the top third of the class. Her push-ups and sit-ups were technically perfect, and she completed far more than the minimum required. The pull-ups, often a weak point for women due to upper body strength differences, were where she knew she would be most scrutinized. She approached the pull-up bar as several instructors and many of her fellow candidates watched. The bar felt cold in her grip as she positioned herself for the test. Taking a deep breath, she began her first pull-up with control form. Her chin cleared the bar cleanly before she lowered herself to full extension. Second repetition, same result. By the 10th pull-up, she was clearly straining, but her form remained solid. At 15 repetitions, she was exceeding most of her classmates' totals. At 20, she was in elite territory. She managed 23 total before her grip finally failed and she dropped from the bar. The watching instructors made notes on their clipboards without expression, but several of her fellow candidates nodded appreciatively. Jake Morrison had completed 21 pull-ups, and Sarah noticed his slight frown when her total was announced. Tony Vasquez gave her an encouraging thumbs up. The message was clear. She belonged here physically. The run was where Sarah truly excelled. Years of competitive swimming had given her exceptional cardiovascular endurance, and she maintained a steady, efficient pace that left many of her male counterparts struggling to keep up. She finished a mile and a half run in 9 minutes and 47 seconds, placing third overall in the class of 62 candidates. That evening in the barracks, the mood was different. The initial physical screening had eliminated 8 candidates who failed to meet the minimum standards, and everyone remaining understood that they had cleared only the lowest hurdle. The real testing would begin with the start of formal training. Sarah was studying in her room when she heard a knock at her door. She opened it to find Tony Vasquez and 2 other candidates. Mark Chun, no relation despite the shared surname, who was a Chinese-American sailor from Hawaii, and David Johnson, a quiet former college wrestler from Minnesota. "Hey, Sarah," Tony said. "We were going to grab some chow at the galley. Want to join us?" Sarah appreciated the gesture of inclusion. "Sure, thanks for asking." As they walked to the dining facility, Mark explained that he had been watching her performance during screening. "That swim time was impressive. You were barely breathing hard when you got out of the pool." "Swimming was my life for about 10 years," Sarah replied. Muscle memory kicks in. David, who rarely spoke, surprised everyone by adding, "The instructors were timing you separately. Heard them talking about your stroke technique." "What do you think that means?" Tony asked. Sarah shrugged. "Probably just making sure I'm not getting any advantages. Everything I do is going to be scrutinized more closely. Comes with the territory." They found a table in the corner of the dining facility where they could talk quietly. The conversation turned to what they expected from the upcoming weeks of training. Each candidate had done extensive research about SEAL training, but everyone knew that reading about it was completely different from experiencing it. "My recruiter said the first phase is designed to weed out people who don't want it badly enough," Mark said between bites of his meal. "Mental toughness over physical ability." David nodded. "Heard stories about guys who could run marathons, but quit because they couldn't handle the mind games." What kind of mind games? Tony asked. Sarah had studied this extensively. Sleep deprivation, constant pressure, making you do things that seem pointless or impossible. They want to see who breaks and who finds a way to push through. You worried about anything specifically? Mark asked her directly. Sarah considered the question carefully. The unknown stuff, probably. I prepared for everything I know about, but there are going to be situations I can't anticipate. That's when you find out what you're really made of. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Jake Morrison and several of his followers. Jake had clearly established himself as a leader among the more aggressive candidates, and his group included some of the strongest performers from the physical screening. Mind if we join you? Jake asked, though he was already pulling up chairs before receiving an answer. The dynamic at the table shifted immediately. Jake's group was louder and more boastful, talking about their expectations for the training and their confidence in their ability to succeed. Sarah noticed that they spoke as if failure was something that happened to other people, not to them. I'm telling you guys, Jake was saying, the key is to stand out. Be the first to volunteer, be the loudest during PT, show the instructors you want it more than anyone else. One of Jake's associates, a former college football player named Rick Stevens, agreed enthusiastically. That's how you get noticed. That's how you earn respect. Sarah listened without commenting, but she disagreed with their approach. Everything she had read suggested that SEAL training was about team performance and quiet professionalism, not individual grandstanding. Standing out for the wrong reasons could make you a target for extra attention from instructors. The conversation continued until lights out, with Jake's group dominating most of the discussion. As they prepared to leave, Jake looked directly at Sarah. You've been pretty quiet tonight. What's your strategy going to be? Sarah met his gaze calmly. Same as everyone else's, I imagine. Do my best, tell my teammates, and don't quit. Jake smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. That sounds like a participation trophy kind of attitude. This isn't about doing your best. It's about being the best. We'll see, Sarah replied simply. As they walked back to the barracks, Tony fell in a step beside Sarah. Jake's trying to get under your skin, he observed quietly. I know, Sarah said. He sees me as competition, which is actually kind of a compliment. What do you figure? Sarah smiled slightly. If he thought I was going to wash out on my own, he wouldn't bother trying to psych me out. The fact that he's worried enough to start early tells me he thinks I might actually make it. That night, as Sarah lay in her narrow bunk listening to the sounds of the base settling into quiet, she reflected on the day's events. The physical challenges had gone well, better than she had hoped. The social dynamics were more complex than she had anticipated, but not unexpected. She knew that earning the respect of her fellow candidates would be just as important as impressing the instructors. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of actual training, and with it, the first real tests of her determination and capability. She had spent months preparing her body and mind for what was coming, but she also knew that no amount of preparation could fully simulate the pressure and intensity of SEAL training. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Sarah's last thought was a reminder she had given herself countless times during her preparation. She wasn't here to prove that women could be SEALs. She was here to prove that Sarah Chun could be a SEAL. The distinction mattered, and it would carry her through whatever challenges lay ahead. The base fell silent except for the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore, a constant reminder of the element that would define so much of their training. Tomorrow, the real test would begin. The alarm sounded at 0500 hours, piercing through the pre-dawn darkness like a knife. Sarah was already awake, having learned years ago that being ready before the wake-up call gave her a psychological advantage. Around her, 61 other candidates stumbled from their bunks, some groaning, others moving with military precision. The lucky ones had managed 4 hours of sleep. Hit the deck. Hit the deck. You have 30 seconds to be in formation outside. The voice belonged to Instructor Petty Officer First Class Martinez, whose reputation for creative punishment had preceded him. Sarah pulled on her boots and grabbed her gear, moving efficiently but not frantically. Panic was the enemy of performance. Outside in the cool morning air, the candidates formed up in 6 ranks of 10, with Sarah positioned in the 3rd rank. The instructors emerged from the shadows like predators, their eyes scanning for any sign of weakness or noncompliance. Chief Petty Officer Williams, the lead instructor for their class, stepped forward. "Welcome to first phase, gentlemen," Williams announced, his voice carrying easily across the formation. "And lady," he added, his eyes finding Sarah, "for the next 7 weeks, your lives belong to us. You will eat when we tell you to eat, sleep when we allow you to sleep, and suffer when we decide you need to suffer. Some of you think you know what hard is. You're about to learn how wrong you are." The first exercise was deceptively simple, a 2-mile run on the beach. What the candidates didn't know was that the instructors had deliberately chosen a route through soft sand that would sap their energy and test their determination. Sarah fell into a steady rhythm, focusing on her breathing and maintaining proper form even as her legs began to burn from the unstable surface. Beside her, Tony Vasquez was already struggling, his face red with exertion. Behind them, she could hear other candidates breathing heavily. The instructors ran alongside the formation, shouting encouragement that sounded more like criticism. "Vasquez, your grandmother runs faster than that. Chun, stop looking so comfortable. This isn't a beach vacation." Sarah maintained her pace, neither speeding up to show off nor slowing down to help struggling classmates. She had learned during her research that SEAL training was designed to create individual accountability within a team framework. Helping others at the wrong time could be seen as weakness, while excessive individual performance could be viewed as grandstanding. Jake Morrison had positioned himself near the front of the formation and was clearly pushing hard to stay visible to the instructors. His strategy of standing out was already in full effect, but Sarah noticed that his pace was unsustainable. Sure enough, by the halfway point, he was beginning to fade while Sarah maintained her steady rhythm. The run concluded back at the grinder, where the instructors immediately ordered the candidates in a push-up position. "We're going to do some simple math this morning," Chief Williams announced. "I count 54 of you who completed that run without falling out. That means we need 46 more candidates to join our class. So you're all going to do push-ups until 46 imaginary people show up." The absurdity of the exercise was intentional. SEAL training was designed to break down logical thinking under stress and test mental resilience when faced with seemingly impossible or pointless tasks. Sarah settled into a steady rhythm, knowing that the exercise would continue until the instructors decided it was over, regardless of how many push-ups they completed. After 20 minutes in the push-up position, with candidates dropping and being ordered back up repeatedly, the imaginary classmates finally arrived. The real lesson was clear. In SEAL teams, you suffered together until everyone made it through together. The morning continued with a series of physical exercises designed to build team cohesion while testing individual limits. Log PT involved teams of 6 candidates carrying heavy logs through various exercises. Sarah found herself assigned to a team with Tony, Mark, David, Jake, and Rick Stevens. The dynamic was immediately tense. "I'll call the cadence," Jake announced without consulting the others. "Everyone stay in step." The log weighed approximately 180 pounds, requiring coordination and communication to move effectively. As they began their first exercise, overhead presses with the log, Sarah noticed that Rick was struggling with the weight. His section of the log was dipping, throwing off the balance for everyone else. "Stevens, get your end up," Jake barked, but the criticism only seemed to make Rick more tense and less effective. "Rick, try adjusting your grip," Sarah suggested quietly during a brief rest. "Fingers underneath, thumbs around. Gives you more control." Rick tried her suggestion and immediately found better stability. The improvement was noticeable to the entire team. Jake shot Sarah a look that she couldn't quite interpret, but he said nothing. As the exercise continued, Sarah found herself naturally falling into a role as a coordinator rather than a leader. She noticed when team members were struggling and offered quiet suggestions. When Mark's grip began to fail during log carries, she helped him find a better position. When Tony started to panic during underwater log walks, she caught his eye and demonstrated the breathing technique that kept her calm. Her approach didn't go unnoticed by the instructors. Petty Officer Martinez made notes on his clipboard as he observed the team dynamics. Later, Sarah would learn that the instructors were evaluating leadership potential just as much as physical capability, and they were watching to see who emerged as natural team builders versus those who simply tried to dominate. The underwater portion of training began that afternoon in the base pool. Drown-proofing was the first major mental challenge, designed to test candidates' ability to remain calm while experiencing controlled drowning sensations. Sarah had prepared extensively for this, practicing breath holding and underwater swimming, but nothing could truly simulate the stress of having her hands and feet bound while being required to survive in deep water. The ocean doesn't care about your feelings, Instructor Martinez explained as the candidates lined up beside the pool. It doesn't care if you're scared, tired, or ready to quit. You will either master your fear, or your fear will master you. One by one, candidates had their hands tied behind their backs and their feet bound together before being ordered into the deep end of the pool. The task was to survive for 20 minutes using only bobbing motions and breath control. Several candidates panicked immediately and had to be rescued by safety divers. When Sarah's turn came, she focused on the mental preparation techniques she had learned from competitive swimming. As she hit the water, she forced herself to relax and find her natural buoyancy. The key was to sink down, push off the bottom with her bound feet, and surface for breath before repeating the process. The first few minutes were manageable, but as time wore on, fatigue began to set in. Her legs burned from the awkward, kicking motion required to push off the bottom. Her lungs began to demand more oxygen than she could provide with quick surface breaths. The temptation to panic and call for rescue grew stronger with each passing minute. Around the 15-minute mark, Sarah began to struggle. Her timing was off, and she found herself taking in water during what should have been breathing moments. The rational part of her mind knew that safety divers were present and would rescue her if necessary, but the primitive part of her brain was screaming about drowning. It was then that she heard Tony's voice from earlier in the exercise. "Just keep going, Sarah. You've got this." He had successfully completed his 20 minutes and was waiting with the other finishers, but he was still offering encouragement. The team support gave her the mental boost she needed to push through the final 5 minutes. When the instructors finally called time, Sarah surfaced and swam to the edge of the pool, exhausted but successful. As the safety divers helped her out of the water and untied her restraints, she noticed Jake sitting with the candidates who had failed the exercise. He would have to repeat it later, and his earlier confidence had been replaced by obvious frustration. That evening, as the candidates cleaned their gear and prepared for the next day, the atmosphere was more subdued than it had been previously. The reality of SEAL training was setting in, and everyone understood that physical fitness alone would not be enough to succeed. Sarah was cleaning her boots when Mark Shun approached her. "Thanks for the help during log PT today," he said quietly. "That grip adjustment made all the difference." "We're all in this together," Sarah replied. "Your success helps the whole team." Mark nodded thoughtfully. "Jake doesn't see it that way. He's been talking to some of the guys about how teamwork is just an excuse for weak performers to drag down the strong ones." Sarah wasn't surprised by this information. She had observed Jake's increasing frustration as he realized that individual excellence didn't guarantee success in team-oriented exercises. "What do you think?" she asked Mark. "I think the instructors are watching to see how we handle both individual and team challenges," Mark replied. "The guys who only care about themselves aren't going to make it very far." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Chief Williams, who was making evening rounds through the barracks area. "Chun," he said, addressing Sarah directly. "Word with you." Sarah followed the chief to a quiet area outside the barracks. Williams was in his mid-40s, with a lean build and alert eyes of a career special operations warrior. He had completed multiple combat deployments and had been training SEAL candidates for over a decade. "How are you feeling about the training so far?" Williams asked without preamble. "Challenged but confident, Chief," Sarah replied honestly. Williams studied her for a moment. You're performing well physically. Your drown-proofing time was solid, and your team leadership during log PT was noted by the instructors. But I want to be clear about something. Sarah waited for him to continue. You're going to face challenges in this program that your male classmates won't face, Williams said. Some of it will come from the other candidates. Some of it might come from instructors who don't think women belong here. And some of it will come from people outside the program who want you to either fail spectacularly or succeed for reasons that have nothing to do with your actual capabilities. I understand, Chief. Do you? Williams asked. Because what I'm telling you is that being good enough won't be enough. You're going to have to be exceptional, not because that's fair, but because that's reality. The question is whether you're prepared for that level of scrutiny and pressure. Sarah met his gaze steadily. I've been preparing for it my whole life, Chief. Every sports team I was ever on, every class I took, every assignment I've had in the Navy. I know what it means to have to prove yourself over and over again. Williams nodded slowly. Good, because tomorrow we start combat conditioning and the real pressure begins. The candidates who are going to make it through this program are the ones who find ways to get stronger when everything gets harder. Make sure you're one of them. As Sarah returned to her room that night, she reflected on the day's events and the Chief's warning. The physical challenges had been demanding, but manageable. The team dynamics were complex, with clear divisions forming between candidates who embraced mutual support and those who viewed the training as individual competition. More importantly, she had begun to understand that SEAL training was as much about psychological resilience as physical capability. The instructors were constantly testing their candidates' ability to perform under stress, to maintain team cohesion in difficult circumstances, and to push through mental barriers when physical discomfort became overwhelming. She had successfully navigated the first major challenges, but Sarah knew that the intensity would only increase in the coming weeks. Phase 1 was designed to eliminate approximately 70% of starting candidates, and she had observed enough of her classmates' struggles to know that being eliminated was a real possibility for everyone, regardless of their preparation or confidence. As she prepared for sleep, Sarah reviewed her mental checklist of goals and strategies for the next day. Physical preparation was important, but mental preparation was crucial. She needed to stay focused on her own performance while remaining alert to team dynamics and opportunities to support her classmates. Most importantly, she needed to continue proving that she belonged in the program based on her capabilities, not her novelty. The true test of her place among the Navy SEALs would come not from completing any single exercise, but from consistently demonstrating the combination of individual excellence and team dedication that defined the Special Operations community. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and Sarah intended to meet them with the same quiet determination that had brought her this far. The journey to earning the SEAL Trident had only just begun, but she was more confident than ever that she had what it would take to reach the end. 3 weeks into first phase, the candidates had been reduced from 62 to 37. The eliminations came in waves. Some candidates quit during particularly challenging exercises, others were medically dropped due to injuries, and a few were administratively removed for failing to meet standards. Each departure served as a stark reminder of how difficult the path ahead would be. Sarah had not only survived the initial cuts, but had begun to establish herself as one of the stronger performers in her class. Her swimming background gave her obvious advantages in water-based training, but more importantly, she had demonstrated consistent mental toughness across all types of challenges. The instructors had noticed, and so had her fellow candidates. The morning began with surf passage training at 0430 hours. The Pacific Ocean was rough, with 6-foot waves and a strong current that made even basic swimming dangerous. The exercise required candidates to work in boat crews of 7 to navigate their inflatable boat small, IBS, through the surf zone, perform tasks on the beach, and return safely through the waves. Sarah's boat crew included Tony, Mark, David, Jake, Rick, and a newer addition named Carlos Martinez, a former Marine who had joined their crew when another candidate was medically dropped. The crew dynamics had evolved significantly over the past 3 weeks, with clear leadership roles emerging through trial and error. Jake had initially tried to establish himself as the boat crew leader, but his aggressive style had created more problems than solutions during high-stress situations. Tony was well-liked, but tended to avoid making difficult decisions. Mark was technically competent, but preferred to follow rather than lead. David remained quiet but reliable, while Rick had gained confidence as his physical abilities improved. Sarah had found herself naturally filling leadership gaps without officially claiming the role. When the crew needed quick decisions during boat races, she made them. When someone was struggling with technique, she offered guidance. When the team needed motivation during long, cold training evolutions, she provided it through example rather than speeches. "Listen up, boat crew leaders," Instructor Martinez called out as the 7-person crews assembled on the beach. "Today's evolution is simple. You're going to take your boats out past the surf zone, perform a man-overboard drill, and return ashore. The catch is that one person from each crew will be acting as a casualty for the entire evolution." The instructor's eyes swept across the assembled candidates. "Chun, you're the casualty for boat crew 2. You'll be dead weight from the moment you hit the water until you're back on shore." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Being designated as the casualty meant she would have to trust her teammates completely while being unable to contribute to their success. It was both a test of team cohesion and a challenge to her own mental toughness. She would have to remain passive while watching her crewmates struggle with tasks that she could help complete. Jake immediately stepped forward. "I'll take crew leader for this one," he announced, looking directly at Sarah as if daring her to object. The crew exchanged glances. Jake's previous leadership attempts had been mixed at best, often resulting in communication breakdowns and poor coordination. But with Sarah designated as a casualty, someone else would have to take charge. "Sounds good," Sarah said simply. "What's the plan?" Jake outlined a strategy that was tactically sound, but overly complicated for the conditions they were facing. His plan called for precise timing and coordination that would be difficult to execute in rough surf with a crew member who couldn't contribute. Sarah wanted to suggest modifications, but her role as the designated casualty meant she needed to let others make the decisions. The crew dragged their IBS into the water, with Sarah positioned in the center of the boat as the injured member. The waves immediately began testing their coordination. Jake called commands from the bow position, but the noise of the surf made communication difficult. Tony and Mark, positioned on opposite sides of the boat, couldn't hear Jake's instructions clearly and began paddling at different rhythms. "Left side, paddle harder," Jake shouted, but his voice was lost in the sound of crashing waves. The boat began to turn sideways to the waves, a dangerous position that could result in capsizing. Sarah could see the problem developing, but forced herself to remain in character as an unconscious casualty. Her crew needed to learn to function without her, even if it meant experiencing some failures along the way. Carlos, drawing on his Marine experience, recognized the danger and began shouting instructions to coordinate the paddling rhythm. David, despite his usual quiet demeanor, took initiative and helped guide the boat's bow back into the waves. Gradually, the crew found their coordination and managed to navigate through the surf zone. Once they reached calmer water beyond the breakers, Jake called for the man-overboard drill to begin. The exercise required the crew to demonstrate their ability to rescue a drowning team member while maintaining control of their boat. Rick volunteered to be the man overboard, jumping into the water and simulating distress. The rescue should have been straightforward, but Jake's complicated coordination plan fell apart under pressure. Commands were confused, timing was off, and the crew struggled to maintain position while attempting the rescue. After several failed attempts, Carlos finally took unofficial charge and guided the crew through a successful rescue using simpler, more direct methods. The return trip through the surf zone was even more challenging. The waves had increased in size, and The crew was tired from their earlier struggles. Jake's continued attempts to micromanage every aspect of the passage created confusion rather than coordination. Sarah watched as her crewmates grew increasingly frustrated with conflicting instructions and poor communication. It was Tony who finally spoke up. "Jake, we need simpler calls. Just basic steering and timing." Jake's face flushed with anger. "I'm a crew leader. Follow my commands." "Your commands aren't working," Mark said quietly but firmly. "We're going to capsize if we keep this up." The confrontation came at the worst possible moment, as a large set of waves approached their position. Sarah could see that the crew was about to be hit by a wave that could flip their boat if they didn't coordinate their response perfectly. She made the decision to break character. "Hard left now," she called out, her voice cutting through the confusion with the authority of command experience. The crew responded instinctively to her clear instruction, turning the boat to meet the wave head-on. They rode over the crest safely, but Jake turned to glare at Sarah with obvious anger. "You're supposed to be a casualty," he said accusingly. "I'm supposed to be your teammate," Sarah replied calmly. "Sometimes it means knowing when to follow and when to lead." They completed the evolution successfully, but the tension within the crew was obvious. As they hauled their boat up onto the beach, Instructor Martinez approached with his clipboard and his characteristic stern expression. "Interesting leadership dynamics out there. Boat crew, too," he observed, looking directly at Jake. "Morrison, tell me about your decision-making process during that evolution." Jake straightened his shoulders. "I followed the plan we discussed, Instructor. The crew had some coordination issues, but we completed the mission." Martinez nodded slowly. "And what about when Chun broke character to give steering commands?" "She violated the exercise parameters," Jake replied stiffly. Martinez turned to look at Sarah. "Chun, explain your actions." Sarah considered her words carefully. "Instructor, my primary responsibility is to my teammates' safety. Following exercise parameters is important, but not at the expense of putting the crew in real danger." "So you made a judgment call," Martinez said. "Yes, Instructor." Martinez made notes on his clipboard. "The rest of you, how do you evaluate your crew's performance today?" Tony spoke up first. "Communication broke down under pressure. We need clearer, simpler coordination methods." Mark nodded in agreement. "Too many instructions, not enough clarity." David, surprising everyone with his directness, added, "Leadership rotation might help. Different situations call for different types of leaders." Carlos, as the newest crew member, stayed quiet, but his expression suggested agreement with the others. Martinez finished his notes and addressed the entire crew. "Leadership in special operations isn't about rank or who talks the loudest. It's about adapting to situations and putting mission success above personal ego. Some of you understand that better than others." As the instructor walked away, Jake turned to face his crewmates. "So what? You're all going to side with her?" "I'm a senior member of this crew." "It's not about sides," Tony said diplomatically. "It's about what works." Sarah decided to address the situation directly. "Jake, you've got good tactical knowledge and physical skills, but leadership in high-stress situations requires flexibility. We all have strengths we can contribute." Jake's jaw tightened. "Easy for you to say. You're getting special attention because you're the only woman here. The instructors go easy on you." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah felt her own anger rising, but forced herself to remain calm. This was exactly the type of conflict she had known would eventually arise, and how she handled it would affect not only her relationship with Jake, but her standing with the entire crew. "Go easy on me?" Sarah repeated quietly. "Is that what you think happened during drown-proofing when I had to stay in the water longer than anyone else because Martinez wanted to see if I would panic? Or during the log PT when Williams made me carry the heavy end by myself? Or yesterday when Rodriguez had me run the obstacle course 3 times while everyone else ran at once?" The crew exchanged glances. Several of them had noticed the extra attention Sarah received from instructors, but they hadn't fully realized how much additional testing she was undergoing. Sarah continued, her voice steady but firm. I'm not here because anyone is going easy on me. I'm here because I've earned it, same as you. And I'll continue earning it every day until either I quit, get dropped, or graduate. Your performance has nothing to do with mine, and mine has nothing to do with yours. We succeed or fail based on our own choices. Jake stared at her for a long moment, then looked around at his crewmates. Whatever he saw on their faces seemed to deflate his anger. Fine, he said finally, but next time we're in the water, I'm still calling the shots. When your shots work, Carlos said quietly but firmly. When they don't, someone else needs to step up. That afternoon brought combat conditioning training, which involved a series of exercises designed to simulate the physical and mental stress of combat operations. Candidates had to complete obstacle courses while carrying heavy packs, perform weapons handling drills under time pressure, and execute tactical movements while sleep-deprived and exhausted. Sarah found herself partnered with different crew members for various exercises, allowing her to observe the leadership dynamics developing throughout the class. Some boat crews had found effective collaboration methods, with leadership roles rotating based on the specific challenge. Others were struggling with personality conflicts and ineffective communication. During the weapons portion of training, Sarah was paired with David Johnson for a drill that required precise coordination. They had to advance through a simulated combat zone while providing mutual cover and support. David's quiet nature, which sometimes made him seem passive, proved to be an asset in tactical situations where careful observation and steady nerves were more valuable than aggressive action. "You're good at this," David observed as they completed their run through the course. "So are you," Sarah replied. "You see things other people miss." David smiled slightly. Growing up hunting in Minnesota, you learn to pay attention to everything around you. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of an argument from another training area. Jake and Rick were having a heated disagreement about tactical procedures, with Jake insisting that aggressive advancement was always preferable to cautious positioning. Rick, whose confidence had grown significantly since the beginning of training, was pushing back against Jake's automatic assumption of leadership. "Maybe it's time for Jake to learn that being loudest doesn't make you rightest," David observed quietly. Sarah nodded. "He's got the skills to be a good SEAL, but he needs to learn when to lead and when to follow. That's harder for some people than others." The day concluded with an announcement that would change everything for their class. Chief Williams gathered all 37 remaining candidates for an evening briefing. "Gentlemen and lady," Williams began, "next week you begin Hell Week. For those of you who don't know what that means, you're about to find out. Hell Week is 5.5 days of continuous training with a total of approximately 4 hours of sleep. You will be cold, wet, tired, and miserable. Some of you will quit. Others will be medically dropped. A few of you will discover that you're stronger than you ever imagined." The chief paused to let his words sink in. "This is where we separate candidates who want to be SEALs from those who will do anything to become SEALs. Your boat crews will be your lifelines. Trust them, support them, and depend on them. Because when the sun comes up on Monday morning, your individual survival will depend entirely on your ability to function as a team." After the briefing, the candidates were given time to prepare their gear and mentally ready themselves for the challenge ahead. Sarah found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her to this point and the obstacles that remained. Hell Week would be the ultimate test of everything she had learned and trained for. As she organized her equipment and checked her cold weather gear, Sarah reflected on the crew dynamics that had evolved over the past weeks. Jake's leadership struggles had been a reminder that technical competence and individual strength were not enough to succeed in team-oriented challenges. Tony's diplomatic approach was valuable for maintaining morale, but decisive action was often needed when diplomacy wasn't enough. Mark's technical skills and David's tactical awareness were assets that needed to be properly utilized. Carlos brought experience, and Carlos brought maturity, while Rick had shown remarkable growth in both confidence and capability. Most importantly, Sarah had learned that effective leadership in high-stress situations required flexibility and the ability to recognize when someone else was better suited to lead a particular challenge. Her competitive swimming background had taught her individual excellence, but SEAL training was teaching her something far more complex: how to maximize team performance while maintaining individual accountability. Hell Week would test every lesson she had learned and every skill she had developed. More than that, it would test her fundamental determination to earn a place among America's most elite warriors. Sarah intended to meet that test with everything she had. Hell Week began at exactly 2,300 hours on Sunday night with the sound of machine gun fire, explosions, and instructors screaming commands through bullhorns. Sarah jolted awake from the deepest sleep she had experienced in weeks, immediately disoriented by the chaos erupting around the barracks. Smoke filled the corridors as instructors wearing camouflage face paint kicked open doors and ordered candidates to grab their gear and form up outside. This is it. This is it. Hell Week has officially started. You have 60 seconds to be in full gear on the grinder, or you're out of the program. Sarah's muscle memory from months of military training kicked in automatically. She pulled on her boots, grabbed her pre-staged equipment, and ran toward the assembly area. Around her, other candidates were doing the same, some moving with practiced efficiency, while others fumbled with their gear in the confusion and artificial fog. The grinder was illuminated by floodlights that created harsh shadows and blinding glare. 37 candidates formed up in their boat crews while instructors circled like predators, looking for any sign of weakness or failure to adapt to the sudden change in routine. The temperature was 45 degrees, and a cold Pacific wind cut through their clothing. Chief Williams emerged from the smoke with a bullhorn, his voice amplified and distorted as he addressed the formation. Welcome to Hell Week, candidates. For the next 5.5 days, you belong to us completely. You will be cold, wet, sandy, and more miserable than you have ever been in your lives. Some of you will ring the bell and quit. Others will be carried away by medical personnel. The rest will discover what you're truly capable of when everything comfortable and familiar is stripped away. The first exercise was surf torture, designed to introduce candidates to the level of misery they would experience for the next 5 days. Boat crews were ordered to link arms and enter the ocean up to their necks, where they would remain motionless while waves crashed over them, and the cold water gradually sapped their body heat and mental resolve. Sarah's boat crew waded into the surf together, the shock of the cold water hitting them like a physical blow. Within minutes, the temperature began affecting their ability to think clearly. Within 15 minutes, several candidates from other crews were showing early signs of hypothermia. The instructors watched carefully, ready to pull anyone who showed signs of serious medical distress. Remember, Sarah said quietly to her crewmates as they stood linked together in the churning water, this is just the beginning. Save your energy for when we really need it. Jake, who was positioned next to her, was already shivering violently. How long do you think they'll keep us here? As long as it takes, David replied through chattering teeth. Focus on staying warm. Move your fingers and toes. Keep your blood moving. Tony, always the optimist, tried to lighten the mood. At least we're getting clean. Haven't had a good shower in days. Despite the misery of their situation, several crew members managed weak smiles. Mark, who was struggling more than the others due to his smaller body mass, leaned slightly against Carlos for shared warmth. The crew was already beginning to function as a mutual support system. After 45 minutes in the surf, the instructors ordered them out of the water for their first land-based evolution. Candidates who could no longer function due to cold exposure were immediately sent to medical for evaluation. 3 members of Sarah's class were removed from training before Hell Week was even an hour old. Boat crew races to the obstacle course. Instructor Martinez shouted through his bullhorn, "Losing crew gets to spend extra time with us tonight." The boat races were a Hell Week staple, requiring crews to carry their 180-pound inflatable boats over their heads while running through sand, navigating obstacles, and competing against other crews. Sarah's crew had practiced these races extensively, but executing them while exhausted and hypothermic was entirely different from training under normal conditions. "I'll take bow," Carlos announced as they positioned themselves around their boat. His marine experience with similar equipment made him a natural choice for the navigation role. "Jake, you and Rick take the heavy positions in the middle," Sarah suggested. "Tony and Mark take stern positions where you can help steer. David and I will fill in wherever we're needed." For once, Jake didn't argue with someone else's suggestion. The cold and exhaustion were already beginning to break down the personality conflicts that had developed during regular training. Survival and crew success were becoming more important than individual ego. They hoisted their boat overhead and began running toward the obstacle course. The combination of soft sand, physical exhaustion, and the awkward weight distribution of the boat made every step a struggle. Other crews were experiencing similar difficulties, with several boats being dropped as their carriers lost coordination. "Stay in step," Carlos called from the front. Left, right. We got this." Sarah found herself naturally adjusting her position to help support crew members who were struggling with the weight. When Tony began to falter on her left side, she shifted slightly to take more of his load. When Rick's grip started to slip, she helped guide his hand to a better position on the boat's rope handles. They reached the obstacle course in 4th place out of 6 remaining crews, a respectable position considering the conditions. The obstacle course itself included wall climbs, rope traverses, and tunnel crawls that had to be completed while carrying the boat and working as a team. The wall climb was where Sarah's upper body strength became a crucial asset. She was able to get up and over the 12-foot wall quickly, then help pull the boat up while her crewmates pushed from below. Her technique and timing were flawless, allowing the crew to maintain momentum through what was often a bottleneck obstacle. Chen setting the pace for Boat Crew 2. She heard Instructor Martinez comment to another instructor, "Watch how she's coordinating the team movement." They completed the obstacle course in 3rd place, earning recognition from the instructors, but no reprieve from the continuing challenges. The next evolution was a 4-mile beach run while carrying the boat overhead, followed by more surf torture, followed by combat conditioning exercises that would continue throughout the night. By 0400 hours, 18 hours into Hell Week, Sarah's crew had lost 1 member to medical issues, and 2 other crews had been reduced to 4 members each. The pace was relentless, with each evolution flowing directly into the next without rest or recovery time. Candidates were operating on adrenaline, determination, and mutual support. It was during the early morning hours of the 2nd day that Sarah first encountered Captain Rodriguez, the commanding officer who would ultimately determine her fate in the SEAL program. Rodriguez had a reputation for hands-on involvement during Hell Week, often appearing without warning to observe candidate performance under maximum stress. The crew was in the middle of a log PT evolution, struggling to coordinate overhead presses with a 300-pound log while standing in knee-deep surf. The combination of exhaustion, cold water, and the unstable footing made the exercise almost impossibly difficult. Several crew members were beginning to show signs of giving up. "I can't hold it anymore," Rick gasped, his arms shaking with fatigue. "We all hold it together, or nobody holds it," Sarah replied firmly. "Find the strength. It's there." Captain Rodriguez emerged from the pre-dawn darkness like a ghost, his presence immediately noticed by the instructors, but not initially obvious to the struggling candidates. He positioned himself where he could observe Sarah's crew while they completed their evolution. "This is exactly what separates SEALs from everyone else," Rodriguez said quietly to Chief Williams. "Look at how she's holding that crew together." Williams nodded. "Chen's been one of our strongest performers throughout first phase. Physical ability, mental toughness, and natural leadership qualities. What about integration with the male candidates? Any issues there? Some personality conflicts early on, but nothing serious. Morrison had some attitude problems, but the training is breaking that down. The rest of the crew respects her performance." Rodriguez watched as Sarah helped coordinate the crew through a particularly difficult sequence of log movements. When Mark began to stumble, she smoothly adjusted her position to provide support without disrupting the overall timing. When Jake's grip started to fail, she called out encouragement that motivated him to push through the moment of weakness. She's not just performing well individually, Rodriguez observed. She's making the whole crew better. The log PT evolution continued for another 20 minutes before the instructors called time. Sarah's crew had maintained better form and coordination than most of the others, despite being just as exhausted and miserable. As they set down their log and prepared for the next challenge, Captain Rodriguez stepped forward. Boat Crew 2 front and center, he commanded. The crew quickly formed up in front of the captain, standing at attention despite their exhaustion and the water dripping from their uniforms. Rodriguez looked each member up and down, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "I've been watching your crew for the past hour," Rodriguez began. "Your coordination is solid, your communication is effective, and your mutual support is exactly what we want to see in SEAL teams. But I have a question." He paused, letting the tension build as the crew waited for whatever test was coming next. "Chun," he said, addressing Sarah directly, "your crewmates are obviously struggling. Tony can barely stand up. Mark looks like he's about to pass out. Rick is showing signs of hypothermia. Why haven't you recommended that any of them be sent to medical?" The question was a trap, Sarah realized immediately. If she recommended medical evaluation for her crewmates, she would be prioritizing their individual welfare over crew performance. If she denied that they were struggling, she would be lying to a superior officer. If she admitted they were struggling, but said they should continue, she could be accused of endangering their health. "Sir," Sarah replied carefully, "my crewmates are all performing within acceptable parameters for Hell Week conditions. They're tired, cold, and uncomfortable, but they're still mission capable. If any of them were in actual danger, I would recommend medical evaluation immediately." Rodriguez studied her response. "And how do you determine the difference between Hell Week discomfort and actual danger?" "Experience, sir. I've pushed myself to physical limits in competitive swimming, and I've learned to recognize the difference between wanting to quit and needing to quit. More importantly, I trust my teammates to know their own capabilities. If they needed medical attention, they would speak up." "Would they?" Rodriguez asked. "Or would they be afraid to appear weak in front of you?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "Sir, we've established a crew culture where honesty about physical condition is seen as strength, not weakness. We can't function as a team if we're lying to each other about our capabilities." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "Interesting perspective. And what makes you think you're qualified to lead these men?" The question hit like a physical blow. Sarah realized that this was the moment she had been preparing for since the day she decided to pursue SEAL training. Rodriguez wasn't just testing her individual performance. He was challenging her right to be there at all. "Sir, I'm not leading these men," Sarah replied. "I'm serving alongside them as part of a team where leadership responsibilities are shared based on the specific requirements of each situation. My qualifications are the same as theirs. I've met every standard, passed every test, and earned my place through performance." Rodriguez's expression remained neutral. Performance is one thing, but SEAL teams operate in combat situations where lives depend on split-second decisions and absolute trust. Do you really believe your male teammates will follow your orders when bullets are flying and men are dying? The challenge was direct and personal, striking at the heart of every doubt Sarah had ever had about her place in special operations. She felt the weight of her crew's attention, knowing that her response would affect not only her own standing, but potentially their confidence in her as well. "Sir," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment, "I believe my teammates will follow effective leadership regardless of where it comes from. I also believe they'll provide effective leadership when the situation calls for it. We're not just a collection of individuals. We're a team that has learned to function together under extreme stress. That's what SEAL training has taught us." Rodriguez studied her for a long moment. "Show us you belong, Chun," he said finally. "Right here, right now. Show us all that you deserve to be part of this brotherhood." The words hung in the cold morning air like a challenge that would define everything that followed. Sarah felt the focused attention of her crewmates, the instructors, and the commanding officer who held the power to end her SEAL aspirations with a single recommendation. 3 seconds passed as Sarah processed the magnitude of what was being asked of her. This was the moment when everything she had trained for, everything she had sacrificed for, and everything she believed about herself would be put to the ultimate test. Her response would determine not only whether she graduated from SEAL training, but whether she had truly earned the right to call herself one of America's most elite warriors. The Pacific Ocean crashed against the shore behind them, the eternal rhythm providing a soundtrack for the moment that would change everything. The test was about to begin, and Sarah Chan was ready to prove exactly what she was made of. Sarah looked directly into Captain Rodriguez's eyes, the weight of his challenge settling over her like armor. In those 3 seconds of silence, she felt the culmination of every moment that had brought her to this point. Every early morning practice session in the pool, every difficult decision during her Naval Academy years, every night she had studied SEAL tactics and procedures, and every day of training where she had proven herself capable of meeting the same standards as her male counterparts. "Sir," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the pre-dawn darkness with absolute clarity, "I don't need to show you that I belong here. I've already proven it every single day for the past month. But if you want to see what Navy SEAL might looks like, I'll demonstrate it right now." She turned to address her exhausted crewmates, each of whom was struggling with the effects of 36 hours of continuous training, cold exposure, and physical demands that pushed beyond normal human limits. "Crew, we're going to show the captain what teamwork under impossible conditions actually means." Without waiting for permission from the instructors, Sarah moved to the abandoned log that had been the focus of their previous exercise. The 300-pound piece of telephone pole lay half-submerged in the surf, seeming to mock their earlier struggles with its dead weight and awkward shape. "We're going to move this log from here to the obstacle course and back," Sarah announced, pointing to a destination approximately 400 meters away through soft sand and around several barriers. "We're going to do it faster than any crew has ever done it, and we're going to do it without a single person falling out." Tony stared at her with exhaustion-glazed eyes. "Sarah, we can barely stand up. How are we supposed to carry that thing 400 meters? "Because," Sarah replied, moving to position herself at the log, "we're not just carrying a piece of wood. We're carrying each other. When you can't go any further, the rest of us will carry you. When I can't go any further, you'll carry me. That's what SEAL teams do." She looked around at her 5 remaining crewmates. Jake, who had spent weeks questioning her presence and authority, was now watching her with something approaching respect. Tony, despite his exhaustion, was nodding in agreement with her plan. Mark, who had struggled with the physical demands throughout training, was positioning himself at the log. David, quiet and steady as always, was already calculating the best grip positions. Carlos, drawing on his Marine experience, was assessing the route and potential obstacles. "Here's how we do this," Sarah continued, taking charge with the natural authority that had been developing throughout their training. "Carlos, you call the pace and navigate. Jake and I will anchor the middle positions where the weight distribution is hardest. Tony and Mark, you take the ends or you can help with steering and balance. David, you're our floater. Wherever we need extra support, that's where you go." Captain Rodriguez watched this display with growing interest. Chief Williams and the other instructors had gathered around to observe what appeared to be an impossible evolution attempted by exhausted candidates who should have been focused on survival rather than heroics. "Chan," Rodriguez called out, "this wasn't an order. You don't have to prove anything beyond what you've already accomplished." Sarah looked back at him, her expression determined but not defiant. "Sir, with respect, this isn't about proving anything to you or the instructors. This is about proving something to ourselves and to each other. We started Hell Week as 6 individuals. We're going to finish this evolution as one team." She turned back to her crew. "Everyone ready?" The responses came without hesitation, despite the obvious exhaustion and physical distress each crew member was experiencing. This was the moment when shared suffering and mutual dependence transformed a group of individual candidates into something approaching an actual SEAL team. "Ready," said Carlos, moving to the front navigation position. "Ready," confirmed Jake, his earlier antagonism completely replaced by focus on the mission ahead. "Ready," agreed Tony, despite trembling with fatigue. "Ready," whispered Mark, though his voice barely carried over the sound of the surf. "Ready," stated David with quiet confidence. They positioned themselves around the log, each person finding their assigned place in the configuration that Sarah had outlined. The weight of the log seemed even more daunting than it had during the organized training evolution, but something had changed in the crew's dynamic. They were no longer 6 people struggling individually with a shared burden. They were a unit working together toward a common goal. "Lift on my count," Sarah called out. 1, 2, 3 up. They raised the log overhead in perfect synchronization, the result of hours of practice and an intuitive understanding of each other's capabilities that had been forged through shared hardship. The weight was still enormous, the physical demands were still crushing, but their coordination was flawless. "Forward march," Carlos called from his navigation position, and the crew began moving across the sand toward their distant objective. The first 50 meters went smoothly as they found their rhythm and adjusted to the weight distribution. Sarah could feel the strength and determination of her teammates flowing through their shared connection to the log. When Jake's grip began to slip, David smoothly moved to provide additional support. When Tony stumbled slightly in the soft sand, Mark adjusted his pace to help maintain balance. By the 100-meter mark, the crew was beginning to show serious signs of fatigue. Mark was breathing heavily, his smaller frame struggling with the weight demands. Tony's legs were shaking visibly with each step. Jake's face was flushed with the strain of maintaining his position under the log. But none of them asked to stop or suggested slowing down. "Halfway point," Carlos announced, though they were actually less than a quarter of the way to their destination. The small deception was intended to boost morale and provide psychological encouragement during the most difficult phase of the evolution. Sarah could feel her own strength beginning to fade, but she also felt something else, the absolute certainty that her crewmates would not let her fail, just as she would not let them fail. This was the essence of what SEAL training was designed to create. Not individual warriors, but teams of warriors who would fight beyond their individual limits for each other. "Switch positions," Sarah called out when she noticed that Mark was beginning to struggle seriously. "David, take Mark's position. Mark, move to floater and help wherever we need it." The position change was executed smoothly without stopping or lowering the log. Mark immediately moved to support Tony, whose legs were beginning to buckle under the sustained effort. The crew continued forward, now with David anchoring one of the end positions while Mark provided mobile support wherever it was most needed. Captain Rodriguez had been walking parallel to their route, observing their technique and coordination. He could see that several crew members were operating well beyond their normal physical limits, sustained only by determination and mutual support. This was exactly what SEAL training was designed to test and develop. "Chief Williams," Rodriguez said quietly to his senior instructor, "how long since any crew has attempted an unsupervised evolution of this difficulty during Hell Week?" "Never seen it, sir," Williams replied. "Most crews are focused on just surviving the prescribed exercises. Taking on additional challenges requires a level of team cohesion that usually doesn't develop until much later in the program." "And Chen's role in organizing this?" Williams considered the question carefully. "Natural leadership emerging under stress, sir. She identified what the crew needed to prove to themselves and gave them a way to achieve it. That's advanced team dynamics for candidates at this level of training." The crew had covered approximately 250 meters when disaster struck. Jake, who had been pushing himself beyond sustainable limits, suddenly stumbled and lost his grip on the log. The sudden shift in weight distribution caused the entire crew to stagger, and for a moment it appeared that they would drop the log and potentially injure several team members. Sarah felt the weight shift toward her side, and knew she had perhaps 2 seconds to prevent a catastrophic failure that could end their evolution and possibly cause injuries. Drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she still possessed, she adjusted her grip and temporarily supported Jake's portion of the load while the crew regrouped. "Tony, slide over to help with Jake's position," Sarah called out, her voice strained but steady. "Carlos, slow the pace until we get redistributed." The crew executed the emergency redistribution flawlessly, with Tony moving to support Jake's former position while Jake recovered his strength and found a new place in the formation. The entire adjustment took less than 30 seconds and was accomplished without dropping the log or stopping their forward progress. "Outstanding," Rodriguez muttered under his breath. "That kind of crisis management under extreme stress is exactly what we're looking for." The final 150 meters to the objective were completed through pure determination and flawless teamwork. Each crew member was operating well beyond their individual capabilities, sustained by the knowledge that their teammates were counting on them and would not accept failure as an option. When they finally reached the obstacle course marker that had been their objective, the crew set down the log with practiced precision. They had completed the most difficult, unsupervised evolution that any of the instructors had ever witnessed during Hell Week training. But Sarah wasn't finished. "Halftime break is over," she announced, though her own exhaustion was obvious to everyone present. "Now we carry it back." The return journey was even more challenging than the outbound trip. Fatigue had accumulated to dangerous levels, and several crew members were showing signs of heat exhaustion despite the cold conditions. But something had changed in their collective mindset. They were no longer individual candidates struggling to survive SEAL training. They were a SEAL team completing a mission. Carlos took over more of the leadership responsibilities during the return trip, calling navigation cues and pace changes while Sarah focused on maintaining crew coordination. Jake, despite his earlier struggles, found new strength and began encouraging his teammates through the most difficult phases. Tony's natural optimism became a crucial factor in maintaining morale. Mark's technical knowledge helped them optimize their technique for maximum efficiency. David's steady reliability provided a foundation that the rest of the crew could depend on. The log seemed lighter somehow, not because the physical weight had changed, but because 6 people were now carrying it as a truly integrated team rather than as a collection of individuals. Their coordination was instinctive, their communication was minimal but effective, and their mutual support was absolute. When they finally returned to their starting point and set the log down for the final time, the crew stood in perfect formation despite their obvious exhaustion. They had completed an evolution that should have been impossible under the conditions they were facing, and they had done it with style and precision that impressed even the most experienced instructors. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward to address the crew directly. "In 20 years of observing SEAL training," he began, "I have never seen a more impressive display of teamwork, leadership, and determination under extreme stress. You didn't just complete a difficult evolution. You redefined what's possible when people trust each other completely." He looked directly at Sarah. "Chun, 3 seconds ago, I challenged you to show us you belong here. What you've shown me instead is that you don't just belong among Navy SEALs. You have the potential to be one of the finest SEALs I've ever had the privilege to observe." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Sir, we all show that today. This crew proved that the sum of our capabilities is greater than any individual part. That's what SEAL teams are supposed to be." Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "Outstanding answer. And that attitude is exactly why you're going to succeed, not just in this program, but in your entire career as a special operations warrior." He addressed the entire crew. "You've all demonstrated today that you have what it takes to earn the SEAL Trident. The question now is whether you can maintain this level of performance and teamwork through the remaining challenges of Hell Week and the rest of your training." As the crew prepared for their next evolution, Sarah reflected on the significance of what had just happened. She had not only proven her individual capabilities, but had demonstrated the kind of leadership and team building that would make her valuable to any SEAL team she eventually joined. More importantly, She had shown her crewmates and the instructors that excellence in special operations wasn't about being stronger, faster, or tougher than everyone else. It was about finding ways to make everyone around you better, especially when conditions became impossible and failure seemed inevitable. The rest of Hell Week continued with its relentless pace and crushing demands, but something fundamental had changed for Sarah's crew. They had discovered what they were capable of when they truly functioned as a team, and that knowledge carried them through every subsequent challenge. When Hell Week finally ended 72 hours later, 21 candidates remained from the original class of 62. Sarah's entire crew had not only survived, but had distinguished themselves as one of the strongest and most cohesive teams in the class. More importantly, they had forged bonds of trust and mutual respect that would serve them throughout their military careers. Captain Rodriguez's challenge had been answered in a way that surpassed even his expectations. Sarah Chun had not just proven she belonged among Navy SEALs. She had proven that the integration of women into special operations could raise the standards of performance rather than lower them. The path to earning the SEAL trident was far from over, but the most crucial test had been passed with distinction. Sarah had shown her Navy SEAL might, and in doing so, had helped redefine what it meant to serve among America's most elite warriors.